The weight of a broken heart. The morning light streamed through the large windows of the enormous mansion in Boston. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint perfume of the gardenias that Eleanor used to place in glass vases on the table. She, with her long hair and warm smile, finished preparing breakfast. She liked to pamper Arthur, her husband. Despite his coldness, there were fleeting moments when she felt him to be human, even tender. Arthur Bennett was a powerful man, a millionaire by inheritance, but known for having built his own reputation. Always impeccable, always distant. He loved control and hated feeling like something was slipping through his hands. In the eyes of the world, Eleanor was a lucky woman. She lived surrounded by luxury, with a driver, a personal masseuse, and access to the most exclusive circles in the city. But the silence between them each morning weighed more than any fortune. They had been married for 7 years. 7 years of treatments, frustrated hopes, and fertility tests. At first, Arthur was understanding, even optimistic. But over time, his patience turned into impatience, and then into contempt. "Maybe this simply wasn't meant for us," he would say, without even looking her in the eyes. One night, during an elegant dinner with investors at their home, one of the wives, unknowingly, asked Eleanor if they were thinking of having children yet. Arthur clenched his jaw, avoided answering, and changed the subject abruptly. Later, in private, he exploded. "Do you know what they think of me? That I married a woman who can't give me an heir? Is that what you want them to think? That I'm an incomplete man?" Eleanor broke inside. Her diagnosis of infertility, seemingly wrong in retrospect, haunted her like a shadow. But more than the physical pain, it hurt to see Arthur become a stranger. The man who one day wrote her a handwritten letter for her birthday now signed checks to pay for her silence. Despite everything, she still loved him. Every morning she prepared his breakfast. Every night she waited for him, with a cup of tea. And on every anniversary, she left a note hidden under his pillow, even though he never said anything. One rainy afternoon, while Arthur was talking in a low voice on the phone in his study, Eleanor heard a name she didn't recognize. Sophia. It wasn't just the name, it was the laugh. A laugh he hadn't shared with her in years. Something in her stomach tightened. She didn't want to think the worst, but a pang of intuition pricked her like a thorn. That night, while he slept, she opened one of the drawers of his desk. There she found a folder with legal documents, and among them, a request for the separation of assets. Signed, sealed, and dated, Eleanor's world collapsed in silence. No screams, no tears, only an almost inaudible whisper escaped her lips. "When did you stop loving me?" The next day, Arthur left on a business trip to Seattle. Eleanor, alone in the immensity of that house that no longer felt like hers, began to pack her things. Not by choice, but out of an instinct for survival. The beginning of her redemption. Welcome to Narratives and Memories. First, I ask you to leave a like so that YouTube understands that our content is valuable and shows it to more people. The doctor's office smelled of disinfectant and despair. Eleanor squeezed Arthur's hand tightly as the doctor reviewed the latest results. She, with her heart pounding in her ears, was hoping for a miracle, but it didn't come. The doctor's voice was soft, almost pitying. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vance. There's no progress. The probability of a natural pregnancy remains minimal." Arthur didn't even blink. He stood up, gave a dry thank you, and left without looking back. Eleanor took several seconds to react before running after him. In the parking lot, under a relentless sun, he spoke the words that would mark her forever. "I can't keep pretending. This isn't a life. I can't stay with an incomplete woman." The blow wasn't just emotional. It was a surgical wound to her soul. She wanted to respond, but tears came first. "Arthur, as if he had been rehearsing this speech for months, continued. I need an heir. My mother, my family. Everyone expects me to continue the legacy. And you tie me to a failure. Days later, she received a notification from a law firm. She had to leave the mansion in 15 days. Not only that, Arthur had canceled her cards, suspended the domestic staff, and blocked her access to the joint account. Everything disappeared, except for the memories that relentlessly hammered at her mind. Eleanor tried to talk to him. She called. She sent messages. She wrote letters or doigts that were never delivered, but Arthur shielded himself with his pride. In the press, rumors arose that the marriage had ended due to irreconcilable differences. But within the walls of silence, the truth was crueler. He discarded her as one gets rid of an investment that did not bear fruit. One afternoon, while trying to withdraw money from an ATM, she discovered that not even the card with her name on it worked. The manager explained with discomfort, "Ma'am, your account was closed by instructions of the primary holder." She staggered out, feeling the ground disappear under her feet. In the solitude of the modest boarding house where she was staying temporarily, she wrote in her diary, "He took everything from me, except what he doesn't see. The love that still remains in me, and the strength he underestimated." Arthur, for his part, began to appear at social events with a new companion, Sophia Marine, the daughter of an influential politician. The press called them the new golden couple of Boston. Meanwhile, Eleanor spent her nights doing laundry for the neighbors, trying to scrape together enough to pay the next week's rent. It was on one of those days, exhausted and with a fever, that she fainted in the street. And there, fate began to change, although she didn't know it yet. A new hope. The rain fell on the rooftops of a small town in Massachusetts with a melancholic rhythm, as if the sky shared Eleanor's grief. She arrived at the bus terminal with an old suitcase, a blanket, and an envelope with the few dollars she had left. No one knew she was the ex-wife of one of the richest men in the country, and she preferred it that way. Hannah, her great-aunt, received her with eyes full of tears and a hug that said more than 1,000 words. The house was small, with peeling paint and a smell of medicinal herbs. But there, for the first time in weeks, Eleanor slept without fear. In the makeshift room she shared with dried plants hanging from the ceiling, she began to understand what it was to rebuild herself from scratch. There were no golden mirrors or Egyptian cotton sheets, but there was hot tea, silence, and, little by little, peace. Without a degree in hand or formal experience, she got a modest job at a local flower shop. She spent hours arranging roses, lilies, and sunflowers. Every flower she cut, every ribbon she tied on the bouquets, was a thread of hope between her fingers. The beauty of the flowers, ephemeral and brave, resonated with her own life. One morning, while watering orchids, a woman came in looking for flowers for her mother's funeral. Eleanor, with a soft voice, put together an arrangement with such care that the client cried when she received it. "You have a gift, girl. Your flowers comfort the soul." Those words were etched in her heart. Despite the pain, something inside her began to sprout. It wasn't rage, nor was it resignation. It was a new kind of strength, silent and serene. Sometimes, while watching the sunset over the colorful rooftops of the town, she wondered if Arthur ever thought about her. But she no longer cried for him. One day, while helping Hannah lift some heavy boxes, she felt a sudden dizziness. She thought it was just exhaustion, or maybe stress. But that night, feeling a slight tingling in her belly, something awoke. A deep intuition, a whisper from her body that she couldn't ignore. She secretly bought a pregnancy test at the pharmacy. Her heart was racing as she waited for the result. When the two clear red lines appeared, her legs gave way. A warm cry broke from her chest. "Oh my God, I'm pregnant." In the silence of the dark room, Eleanor hugged her pillow and whispered, "No one is going to take this child from me. This one will be mine, and will be loved from the first heartbeat." The revelation. The buzzing of crickets mixed with the dry heat of the afternoon in the Massachusetts town. Eleanor had been having morning sickness for days, an inexplicable fatigue, and sudden dizziness. At first, she thought it was stress, or maybe a persistent flu, but something inside her whispered that it was different, that someone, was growing inside her body. After weeks, she decided to go to Dr. Beltran's small office, a rural doctor known for the delicacy with which she treated her patients. The doctor, with attentive eyes and firm hands, examined her carefully. "We're going to do a blood test, just to rule it out," she said in a calm voice. But Eleanor already knew. Her body was screaming what her mind was still resisting to accept. 2 days later, she returned for the results. The paper trembled in her hands before she even read it. Dr. Beltran came in smiling. "Congratulations, Eleanor. You're pregnant." She was speechless. A dense silence filled the room. Her eyes became moist, her heart raced, and a latent question floated in the air. How can this be? For years, she was told her body was sterile, useless for giving life, and now that she was alone, without support, without a home, she was pregnant. A miracle or a punishment? A gift from God or a cruel joke of fate? The doctor held her hand firmly. "Sometimes the body responds when we stop demanding from it. Maybe your soul needed to heal before allowing life to flourish within you." Eleanor left the clinic stunned. She walked through the cobblestone streets as if floating. People passed by, cars honked, but she only heard her own heart. She returned home and, trembling, told her Aunt Hannah the news. The old woman cried with joy, hugging her niece as if she were her own daughter. But that night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The weight of the decision began to fall on her shoulders. How could she raise a child alone? What if Arthur finds out? What if he tries to take him away from her? The memories of what he was capable of doing haunted her. She knew that if that child came into the world, she would never allow him to suffer at the hands of his father. However, despite the fear, something new grew inside her. Not just the baby, but an inner fire. For the first time in a long time, she felt full, complete, capable. It didn't matter that Arthur had called her incomplete. Her body was now a home, her soul was a shield, and her heart was a sacred territory. She knelt before the image of the Virgin Mary in the corner of the room and whispered, "Thank you, but protect him. Make me strong. For him, for me, the Father and the Son." The ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel was packed. Golden lights, expensive wine, and manufactured smiles dominated the scene. Arthur, in an impeccable dark suit, toasted with Sophia Marin, his new fiancée. The daughter of a senator, beautiful and strategic, Sophia represented everything the world expected of him. Political stability, social inheritance, a perfect image. But while she gave an elegant speech about her new philanthropic project, Arthur didn't listen to a single word. His gaze was lost in a memory. Eleanor's light laughter on a Sunday morning when he surprised her with pastries and coffee in bed. Why was that simple thing 1,000 times more real than all of this? That night, after the event, Arthur entered his new apartment alone, all silent marble like a mausoleum. He turned on the television, but the sound was just noise. He poured a glass of whiskey and stood watching an old photo tucked away among his books. Eleanor, smiling in the garden, holding a pot of lavender. He felt a pang in his chest. It wasn't remorse, it was something worse. Yearning. a kind of emptiness that echoed even when surrounded by luxury. He tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing. She couldn't give me a child. There was no future with her. But with each attempt to justify himself, the pain grew. Sophia was beautiful, yes, educated, elegant, desired, but there was a coldness in her kisses, an absence of soul in her hugs that Arthur now noticed. It wasn't her fault. It was just that he searched in her eyes for a light that only existed in Eleanor's. He started having strange dreams. He dreamed that Eleanor was calling him from afar in a field of flowers, and that he would run. But he could never reach her. He would wake up sweating, his heart racing, and her name stuck in his throat. One day, during a meeting with his lawyers, he overheard an employee comment that he had seen his ex working in a flower shop in the Massachusetts town. His whole body tensed. Eleanor in Fairhill? He pretended not to care. But that night, he canceled dinner with Sophia, drove to his old house, and stayed parked in front of it, watching from a distance like a stranger. The house looked empty, dead without her. He called his mother Margaret, a haughty and demanding woman, and asked her, "Do you think I made a mistake?" The answer was as sharp as a knife. "You were wrong to take so long. That woman was never on our level." But Arthur no longer believed that. He no longer knew what to believe. He only knew that somewhere, his absence hurt more than his presence had, and that no matter how hard he tried to move on, there was an open wound that neither time nor money could close. It was a warm morning in Chicago when Arthur got out of his armored black car, accompanied by advisors and photographers. The visit to the Roots of Hope NGO was part of a campaign to soften his image in the business world. The idea was simple: photos handing out food, an inspiring speech, and then lunch with influential businessmen. A facade routine. The place was simple, but full of life. Children ran among wilting flowers and broken toys. Women prepared food in large pots. Arthur, with his rehearsed smile, walked among the volunteers. But something made his body freeze. There, at the back of the courtyard, with a floral apron, her hair in a braid, and a different glow on her face, was Eleanor. She was holding a box of vegetables and giving instructions to a little girl. What paralyzed Arthur, however, wasn't just seeing her there. It was noticing what she was carrying in her belly. A prominent, lively, round belly. Eleanor was pregnant. The world around him fell silent. The sound of voices, the click of cameras, everything disappeared. He took a step forward without thinking, but before he could say a word, she saw him. For a second, time stopped. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise, and her expression went from astonishment to fury in a matter of seconds. She turned her face, handed the box to another volunteer, and walked toward the makeshift kitchen without directing a single word to him. Arthur felt a blow to his chest. How is this possible? Whose child is that? And why didn't she tell me? His head spun with 1,000 questions, all unanswered. He spent the rest of the visit on autopilot. He gave his speech, posed for photos, but in his mind, there was only one image. Eleanor, radiant, full, with his child. Because deep down, something inside him told him that baby was his. And with that idea came a second, even more devastating blow. He had left her just when she had finally given life to what he so desired. In the car on the way back, his advisors spoke enthusiastically about the success of the visit. Arthur, in silence, stared at his reflection in the window. He remembered the last time he saw her, crying with the divorce papers in her hands. He thought she was broken, but now it was he who seemed to be in ruins. When he got home, he went straight to the bar. He poured a double shot of whiskey and called the private detective he had secretly hired years ago. I need you to investigate Eleanor Reyes. Where does she live? Who is she with? And since when has she been pregnant?" His voice trembled, not with rage, but with something Arthur no longer knew how to name. Guilt. A father is born. The sound of whiskey hitting the glass was the only noise in the dark apartment. Arthur spent the night staring at the ceiling, Eleanor's face etched in his mind like a burning tattoo. Pregnant? After all the doctors said? It can't be mine. It can't. That's what he repeated like a mantra, but the doubt had already settled in and was growing like a slow poison. In the following days, Arthur became a ghost. He canceled meetings, avoided Sophia, and ordered his private detective to report on Eleanor's every move. He received photos daily, her serving clients at the flower shop, helping out at NGO workshops, buying fruit at the market with a hand on her belly, and always smiling. That last part tortured him. Why did she look so happy? How could she be so complete without him? The question hurt more than he wanted to admit. For years he believed she depended on him, that without his protection she would wither. But there she was, flourishing without him, and perhaps with his child in her belly. Arthur began to drive alone to the Massachusetts town on weekends, without telling anyone. He would stay in his car, watching from afar with dark glasses and the engine off. One afternoon, he saw her helping a child draw flowers on a community mural. The boy rested his head on her belly and said, "Have you talked to your baby yet? I talk to my little brother like that." She laughed and replied, "Of course I tell him everything." That was too much, and when Arthur gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes burning, he realized that he had dreamed of that moment, and yet he had thrown it all away with harsh words and proud decisions. But he still clung to excuses. He told himself that maybe she was with someone else, that maybe she had moved on quickly. "I don't have proof that this child is mine. I can't assume something like that without certainty." But deep down, he already knew. He knew her eyes. He knew his own timeline, and the baby would be born exactly 9 months after the divorce. One night, drunk and consumed by anguish, Arthur called Eleanor. She didn't answer. He sent a message. "We need to talk." She replied hours later, dryly, "There's nothing to say. What you broke can't be fixed with words." He threw his phone against the wall. The sound of the glass shattering echoed in the empty room. Loneliness, for the first time, was deafening. No glass of wine, no Persian rug, no imported car, eased the hole in his chest. Regret began to burn inside, but his pride still fought to put out the fire. And as happens with men who love too late, Arthur was discovering that denial was just the beginning of the fall. The fine rain fell on the city, as if the sky, too, was in mourning. Arthur was driving slowly, almost aimlessly. But his heart was leading him to a specific destination, the old house where he lived with Eleanor. He parked in front of the iron gate, now covered in rust. The house was empty, for sale. A garden without flowers, dusty windows, and a silence that screamed. He got out of the car and touched the gate, as if hoping she would still open the door smiling. But all he found were memories. In the garden, he remembered Eleanor with her hands full of dirt planting daisies. On the terrace, the two of them drank coffee while talking about the future, a future he himself destroyed, driven by something he couldn't even explain. He drove to his grandmother Margaret's house, the only person in his family who always spoke to him with honesty. She received him with surprise, but also with tenderness. She looked him in the eye and said bluntly, "You look like your grandfather when he lost the love of his life, hard on the outside, empty on the inside." Arthur sat in the old armchair, his head bowed. He told her everything. Eleanor's pregnancy, the encounter at the NGO, the confrontation at the flower shop. He expected to be judged, but he received silence. Until Margaret got up, went to an old drawer, and came back with a yellowish envelope. This arrived months ago. The girl left it with a neighbor. I suppose it was for you, but you were too busy running away to ever find out. Arthur took the letter with trembling hands. It was Eleanor's handwriting. He opened it carefully. The paper smelled of lavender and nostalgia. Arthur, I know you're leaving. I know I'm no longer the woman you want, but I want you to know something before you disappear completely from my life. I never stopped dreaming of you, not even when the pain was tearing me in two. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for not being able to give you a child, but if one day the miracle comes, I want you to know that you were the first man I imagined as a father. With all that's left of me, Eleanor. The words crushed him. A love letter, written shortly before the end. A declaration of hope and pain never read. Arthur cried, not as a businessman, not as a public figure, but as a broken human being. What have I done, Grandma? How was I so blind? Margaret came closer, stroked his face, and said only, sometimes the hardest heart is the one that is most afraid to love. But if it still beats for her, don't give up. The dawn fell silently over the town when a sharp pain woke Eleanor from a restless sleep. It was too early. There were still weeks until the birth, but something wasn't right. She felt the contraction like a wave tearing her apart from the inside. Her breathing became ragged, and a cold sweat ran down her forehead. No, not yet, she whispered, trying to get out of bed. She cried out for Aunt Hannah, who ran to the room with eyes full of fright. Seeing her niece's pained expression and the stained sheet, she grabbed the phone and called a taxi. The nearest hospital was 20 minutes away. Every second was an eternity. Meanwhile, Arthur, still with Eleanor's letter folded in his pocket, was in his apartment staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The phone rang. It was the detective. Sir, Mrs. Reyes was admitted to the hospital. It looks like she went into premature labor. The glass of water fell from his hand. The sound of shattering glass was drowned out by the gunshot of his heart. Without a second thought, he grabbed his car keys and drove through the empty pre-dawn to the town. The city lights flickered as if destiny was sending him signals. When he arrived at the hospital, sweating, disheveled, he desperately asked for Eleanor Reyes. The receptionist hesitated, but seeing his anguish, she pointed him to the maternity ward. In room 208, he saw her, lying down, pale, with her eyes closed. The doctors moved around her. Aunt Hannah saw him, and for a moment wanted to throw him out. But her eyes shone with something between rage and compassion. You're late, but you're here. Eleanor saw him for the first time when they were pushing her to the operating room. Her eyes opened in confusion. He held her hand for an instant. I'm here. She said nothing, just closed her eyes, overcome by the pain. The birth was complicated. There were screams, medical orders, beeping machines. Arthur, outside the operating room, paced back and forth like a lost child. And then the sound that cut through it all, the cry of a baby. A nurse came out with a tired smile. It's a boy. He's fine, and so is she. Arthur fell to his knees in the hallway. Tears ran freely. For the first time, he felt the weight and blessing of being a father. He felt the... Hours later, he entered the room. Eleanor was sleeping. In the bassinet next to her, a small, pink baby, with his eyes closed and his fists clenched. Arthur approached with trembling hands. He touched the baby's head with delicacy. Hello, Leo. It's me. And there, in that instant, without contracts, without fortunes, without pride, a man broke, and a father was born. The road to forgiveness, The morning light filtered through the hospital room windows, painting the atmosphere with soft tones of gold. The silence was only interrupted by the peaceful breathing of Leo in the bassinet next to the bed. Arthur was sitting in an armchair with swollen eyes and a shattered soul. He hadn't slept in hours. He couldn't. Every glance at the baby was a miracle and a stab. Aunt Hannah, with a stern look, entered the room and handed him a small blanket. "Hold him. Babies recognize the heart of the one who loves them." Arthur hesitated, but finally got up and walked to the bassinet. His trembling hands touched Leo's soft skin. And then, as if the world stopped, he took him into his arms. Leo let out a small sound, almost a sigh, and snuggled up against his father's chest. Arthur cried, in silence. The tears fell without hurry, as if washing away years of hardness. He felt for the first time that something inside him was opening, a space that had never been touched before. Eleanor woke up slowly. Seeing the scene, her body tensed. The image of Arthur holding her son was, at the same time, moving and terrifying. She spoke in a low but firm voice. "Who gave you permission to touch him?" Arthur looked at her with red eyes, and his soul laid bare. "I didn't touch him as Arthur Bennett. I hugged him as a broken man, as a father who didn't know how to be on time." Eleanor looked away. The emotion on her face was evident, but she didn't give in. It's not enough to show up when everything is already done. It's not enough to cry. I carried this pregnancy alone. I cried every night alone, and I protected him from you, because you were the one who abandoned us. He came closer, still with Leo in his arms. He wanted to kneel, to plead, to shout, but he did none of that. He just murmured, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Mamas. I know, but I want to be here, even if it's from afar. I want him to know me." Eleanor extended her arms and took Leo back. She looked at him as one who holds a piece of their own heart and said, "Without hatred but with pain, you're going to have to prove it. Not with words, Arthur. With actions, and that takes time." He understood. He returned the small blanket he was still holding. He gently stroked the baby's foot and left the room in silence, with his chest full of love and guilt. A second chance. The weeks that followed the birth of Leo were a mixture of tenderness and fatigue for Eleanor. The sleepless nights, the unexpected cries, the constant fear of making a mistake. It was all new. But there was also light. Every smile from her baby, every curious look, was a reminder that it was worth continuing, even with a heart in pieces. Arthur, for his part, kept his distance. He kept his promise. He didn't invade, didn't insist, but began to act in silence. He hired an excellent pediatrician to attend to Leo without them knowing he was behind it. He discreetly paid the hospital bills, and every week a new anonymous delivery would arrive at Aunt Hannah's house. Diapers, ointments, carefully chosen clothes. At first, Eleanor was suspicious. She thought they were donations from the NGO, but there were too many details. The exact size of the clothes, the brand of soap she preferred, even a sunflower-shaped rattle, her favorite flower. Something inside her told her it was Arthur, and that disarmed her. One morning, when she opened one of the boxes, she found a small, unsigned note. It just said, "I know I was late, but I still want to learn to be the man you deserve." Eleanor read it in silence. Tears came without her being able to stop them. Aunt Hannah, always attentive, sat next to her niece and said, "I'm not telling you to forgive him, but there are men who change when love hurts them more than pride." Eleanor was still scared of making a mistake, of opening the door again to a man who had left her in ruins. But she also felt something else. Arthur's presence, though absent, made itself felt in every gesture. And that was beginning to confuse the heart she thought she had shielded forever. Leo, with his big, lively eyes, seemed to notice the change. Every time he saw a new box, he would wave his little arms as if he knew there was affection inside, however discreet. And Eleanor was beginning to understand something that hurt to accept. Arthur was trying in his own way, as he knew how, as he could. One rainy afternoon, Leo had a fever. Eleanor panicked. She didn't know what to do. She called the pediatrician's number that the NGO had gotten for her. In less than 15 minutes, the doctor was at the door with everything needed. Seeing something in his attitude, in his care, made her ask, "Who sent you?" The doctor smiled, hesitated for a moment, but was honest. "Let's just say it's someone who still believes he can repair what he broke." Eleanor was silent. She looked at Leo asleep and whispered, "Maybe, just maybe." It was a sultry night when Leo began to cry in a different way. His little body was burning with fever, and his eyes were glassy. Eleanor, desperate, tried to lower it with compresses, but nothing worked. Aunt Hannah called an emergency taxi, and in minutes, they were at the nearest hospital. In the emergency room, Eleanor tried to stay calm, but her hands were trembling. Leo was crying weakly, as if he no longer had the strength. The doctor was examining him, but time dragged on like a punishment. It was then that, suddenly, the door to the waiting room opened, and Arthur appeared. She didn't ask how he knew. She just looked at him with eyes full of tears and said nothing. Arthur walked toward her, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to justify himself. He just sat beside her in silence, like someone who understands that words are no longer enough. Hours later, the doctor informed them that it was only a mild viral infection, but that Leo would remain under observation for 24 hours. Eleanor breathed a sigh of relief, and when she turned, she saw Arthur leaning against the wall, his gaze fixed on the sleeping baby through the window of the ICU. "Thank you for coming," she murmured, without looking at him directly. He was moved. "I couldn't stay home knowing he was sick." Not again. The nurse informed them that only one of the parents could spend the night in the observation room with the baby. Eleanor hesitated. She was exhausted, emotionally drained. She looked at Arthur and, in a silent gesture, handed him the little backpack with Leo's clothes. "Take care of him," she said simply. Arthur entered the room with a heavy heart. Leo was sleeping, connected to monitors and tubes. He sat next to the small hospital bed and took his son's tiny hand. He didn't sleep all night. He sang lullabies in a low voice, made promises, cried, and asked for forgiveness. Not out loud, but with his gaze, with his touch, with his presence. Outside, Eleanor watched through the small window in the door. She saw Arthur leaning over the crib, his face tired, but full of love. For the first time, she didn't see the proud man who had broken her, but a father, a man trying to love well. And that moved her inside. The next morning, when Arthur came out of the room with Leo in his arms, she extended her arms. He handed her the baby with a soft kiss on her forehead, and before he left, he murmured, "Thank you for trusting me, even if only for one night." Eleanor didn't respond, but inside, something was beginning to change. Not all the words in the world would have done what that one silent night accomplished, showing her that perhaps he could still be part of their story. The last dance, the hospital was already quiet when Aunt Hannah took Leo home, insisting that Eleanor get some rest. But that night, sleep didn't come. Sitting on the bench in the hospital's outdoor garden, Eleanor hugged her knees, looking at the cloudy sky. The weight of the last few days left her vulnerable and confused. Arthur approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. He sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. For several minutes, neither of them said anything. Only the sound of crickets and the rustling of trees filled the air. "I don't know where to start," he murmured, looking at the ground. Eleanor took a deep breath, not responding. He continued, "I believed that by leaving, I was doing you a favor. I thought that by leaving, I was freeing you from the failure we felt. But the truth is, I left because I was afraid. Afraid of being like my father. Of staying. Of failing you. Of repeating his abandonment." She looked at him, surprised. She had never seen him so naked, so fragile. "And so you decided to abandon me first," she replied with contained pain, as if that would hurt less. Arthur nodded, his eyes full of tears. "Yes, and you don't know how much I regret it. Since you left, there hasn't been a single day I haven't hurt from your absence. I became everything I swore I would never be, a lonely, empty man with success, but without a soul." Eleanor's tears finally fell, not just for him, but for her, for everything she went through alone, for the nights of fear, for the words that were never said. "You broke something inside me, Arthur. Something that took a lot to heal." He moved a little closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "I'm not here to ask you to love me again. I know you can't demand that. I just want you to know that I love you, in a way I never knew how before. And if you'll let me, I want to try to be someone worthy of you and Leo." The silence between them was now different, dense, filled with memories and possibilities. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Her heart was divided between the pain of the past and the echo of a love that perhaps was still alive. But it was still too soon. The wound was still open, although it was beginning to scar. "Don't promise anything, Arthur. Just show me who you can be now." And in that early morning, without kisses, without endings, just with the truth laid bare, two hearts began to find their way back to each other. Slowly, with fear, but alive. A new family. The smell of lavender and chamomile tea filled Aunt Hannah's small room. The days had become slower for the old woman, who now spent most of her time lying down, watching out the window where the bougainvillea flowers danced with the wind. Her body was beginning to give way, but her mind was still lucid, and her heart was restless. Eleanor entered with Leo in her arms. Her tired expression was mixed with tenderness as she saw her grandmother smile, though she was fragile. She placed the baby next to her, and for a few minutes, no words were said, only glances, sighs, and a silent affection between 3 generations. "Now your son has your father's eyes," murmured Hannah, stroking Leo's little hand. "And the strong soul of the Vance women." Eleanor smiled sadly, sitting next to the bed. Her eyes soon filled with tears. There was no need to explain anything. Her grandmother knew that look, the one of someone who carries an unresolved love. "I saw him cry, Grandma. He spoke to me like never before. He says he's changed, but I don't know if I can trust him again. I'm afraid of opening the door and having him break me again." Hannah squeezed her hand with a strength that was surprising for someone so fragile. "My dear, true love isn't about not being afraid. It's about feeling it and still choosing to love." Eleanor cried in silence, looking at Leo sleeping. Hannah continued, "To forgive is not to forget what happened. It is to choose not to let that pain chain you. Arthur doesn't deserve a second chance just for wanting it, but you deserve to live without carrying a grudge." She looked at her with tear-filled eyes, but also with a brilliant lucidity. "I loved once, and out of pride, I let him go. I lived many years with that thorn. I don't want you to live like that." Eleanor felt the weight and the lightness of those words. It was as if her heart, until then silent, began to whisper. There was no definitive answer, but there was a path, and maybe deep down, she knew that path involved listening to what love still had to tell her. leaving the room with Leo snuggled against her chest. She looked at the pink sky of the sunset and whispered, Maybe there's still something to save. A perfect choice. The coffee shop in the small town square was almost empty when Eleanor arrived. She had Leo in the stroller, and her eyes were full of quiet. Arthur was already waiting for her, sitting at a discreet table, with a humble and anxious expression. When he saw her, he got up slowly, but she made a signal with her hand. "Just listen today, please." He nodded without saying anything. He sat down. They were face to face, but between them was a broken bridge, made of memories, wounds, and unfulfilled promises. Eleanor looked at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully, before she began to speak. "For months I slept with fear. Fear of not having enough to feed him, of something happening to him, of him being born and not recognizing me as his mother." Her voice was firm, but full of emotion. "You have no idea what it was like to feel the ground torn from under my feet. You were my home, Arthur, my refuge. And one day, you just left me in the street as if I had never meant anything." He squeezed his hands on the table but remained silent. His eyes shone, but he didn't dare to interrupt. "I cried until I had no more tears. I felt empty, useless, and still I never stopped loving you. I hated myself for that. How can you love someone who broke you?" She paused. She took a deep breath. "But then Leo grew inside me, and with every heartbeat of his, something of mine was reborn. I discovered that the love I had for you wasn't a weakness. It was my strength. I survived for him. And yes, also for what we once were." Arthur held back his tears. His eyes were fixed on hers, as if every word was a stab deep in his chest. "When I saw you at the hospital, when you held him, I saw the man I dreamed of as the father of my son. But I also remembered the one who abandoned me without looking back, and that still hurts." She reached out, gently touched his hand, and with a soft voice completed, "I don't know if I can trust you again, but I also don't want to live with this wall between us. For Leo's sake, and for what's left of us, we deserve to try." Arthur finally spoke in a broken whisper. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity, even with fear. I promise not to waste it." And in that instant, between tears and confessions, between pain and hope, something new began to be born. It wasn't a reconciliation yet, but it was forgiveness, and with it, the real chance to start over. It was a Sunday morning, and the sun shone timidly through the window of Aunt Hannah's little house. Eleanor had invited Arthur to spend a few hours with Leo. They weren't living together yet. They hadn't officially gotten back together, but now he was welcome, with limits, with caution, but with space to be a father. Leo, almost 9 months old, was beginning to explore the world with curious eyes and wobbly steps. He was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by toys. Arthur, kneeling next to him, made funny voices with a teddy bear. Eleanor watched from afar, leaning against the kitchen doorway, with a mixture of love and doubt dancing in her chest. "This is the bravest bear in the world," Arthur said, as he pretended to have a battle against a stuffed giraffe. Leo laughed with his mouth wide open, that laugh that only babies can give, pure, contagious, full of life. Eleanor allowed herself to smile. It was beautiful to see them together, but there was still a part of her that was protective, an invisible barrier that time and gestures were slowly trying to dissolve. Then, suddenly, Leo babbled something. At first, it was just a sound, but the second time it was clear, loud, and unexpected. "Papa!" Time stopped. Arthur froze, as if he wasn't sure what he had just heard. Eleanor dropped the kitchen towel she had in her hands. Leo repeated, now pointing his little fingers at the man in front of him. "Papa!" Arthur's eyes filled with tears instantly. A knot formed in his throat, and he fell to his knees, hugging his son with all the care in the world. "Yes, my love, I'm your papa," he murmured through tears, kissing the boy's head. Eleanor put her hand to her mouth. She was crying in silence. There was nothing left to say. In that instant, no promise, no explanation, no apology was worth more than that word, spoken with innocence and truth. Leo had chosen, and with a single word, he disarmed the past, broke down the barriers, and showed that sometimes love just needs a signal to bloom again. The wedding. The sky over the town looked hand-painted. Soft clouds floated lazily, and the air was filled with the aroma of wildflowers. On top of a hill, between ancient trees and a small wooden altar adorned with lavender, Arthur waited. He was more nervous than ever. He was no longer the man of expensive suits and cold speeches. He was just a man in love, waiting for the woman who had changed his life. The ceremony had been planned with simplicity. No luxuries, no photographers, or influential guests. Only the closest people. Aunt Hannah, some neighbors from the NGO, the nurse who had cared for Leo, and the priest who baptized the children of the town. Arthur wanted it that way. A new beginning. Clean and pure. The chairs were full of wildflowers. A single violin played a soft melody. And then a murmur spread. "Here she comes!" Eleanor appeared at the top of the hill with Leo in her arms, dressed in white. The dress was simple, of light fabric, but she looked like she had stepped out of a dream. The wind played with her skirt and her hair, and the baby was smiling, waving his little arms, as if he knew that day was special. Arthur saw her and felt his legs weaken. His eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just from seeing her so beautiful. It was from seeing her there, present, choosing him again, choosing them. When she reached the altar, Eleanor handed Leo into Aunt Hannah's arms and looked into Arthur's eyes. He took her hands, and with a choked voice he said, "I have no perfect promises, but I have a heart that now beats whole, thanks to you and our son. I want to love you as one loves when they understand the value of loss." She smiled emotionally. Tears rolled down her face, but they were not of pain. They were of liberation. "And I," she said, "choose to trust. I choose to heal with you, because I learned that love is not the absence of wounds. It's knowing how to love again, even with the scars." The priest blessed them with simple and true words. When they were finally declared husband and wife, the applause was soft but full of soul. Aunt Hannah cried without holding back. Leo in her arms babbled with laughter, as if he felt that everything was finally in its place. At the end of the afternoon, as they danced barefoot on the grass, Arthur held Eleanor by the waist and Leo in his arms. The sun set slowly behind the mountains, painting the sky with warm tones of orange and gold. And there, without luxury, without an audience, the family that fate almost destroyed and that love patiently rebuilt was born. A story of redemption. The house was small, with adobe walls, wooden windows, and a garden that Eleanor insisted on caring for every day. There were pots of lavender at the entrance, toys scattered on the lawn, and the constant sound of laughter, especially Leo's, who was now just over a year old, running behind a stubborn chicken that had escaped from the coop. Arthur was on the terrace, barefoot, with a cup of coffee in his hands. He watched the scene as one watches the greatest spectacle of their life. His wife, in a light dress and with dirty feet, guiding their son with patience and joy. That was all he never knew he needed. They didn't live in luxury. Money was now secondary. He had left part of his business behind, ceding control of the company to his brother. He wanted time. Time with Leo. Time with Eleanor. Time to be the man he always wanted to be, but only now knew how. Sometimes at night, Eleanor would wake up with nightmares from the past. Sometimes Arthur still blamed himself for everything he had destroyed. But in those moments, a silent hug, the warmth of the other in the narrow bed, was enough to remember that they were there, together, and that was already everything. Aunt Hannah spent weekends with them, telling old stories, teaching Leo to plant beans in little glass jars. The house was never silent. It always smelled of bread in the oven, soft music played on the old radio, and tiny footsteps could be heard running through the living room. Arthur spent hours building wooden toys in the yard. Leo said "Papa" with pride and "Mama" with tenderness. And every time he fell and cried, it was both of them who ran to pick him up. There were no perfect roles. There was love, shared, present. One afternoon, the three of them sat on the swing made of ropes and a board in the garden. Eleanor rested her head on Arthur's shoulder, and Leo slept in her lap. The sun was setting slowly, coloring the sky with warm tones, as if the whole world sighed in peace. "Do you think this will last?" Eleanor murmured. "I don't know for how long," Arthur replied, kissing her forehead. "But I know that every day we're going to choose it. Because love didn't heal everything. The scars are still there, like marks from a war overcome. But love transformed everything. And in that modest house, with laughter in the garden and a creaking swing, there was finally a home." I invite you to leave your opinion about this incredible story in the comments. If you liked it, share it. And subscribe to the channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen that will probably also move you. Don't miss it.